We're starting to record. So the first thing I want to do is I want to show you guys Canvas and just go through what I've put on there, what I have added, what you should be aware of. I'm going to share the web browser. Awesome. Chat feature up. Awesome. Okay. So if you go into Canvas, this is the student view. What you'll see is we have the updated syllabus here, right? This has got the new schedule, the new topics, all of that. I put requesting to annotate. I'm going to decline all annotation requests. If you have questions, put them in the chat. Annotate means like you're going to draw on the screen, and that I think is going to be distracting. So you know. Okay. So here we are again. We got this the WebEx link. If you need Wi-Fi, there are some companies offering 60 days of free Wi-Fi. If you forgot your textbook at home, this is a link to get a free textbook. If you need to download WebEx, which obviously you guys don't, you're here. This is that link. Then the other link I added today was an online textbook resources. So the textbook company has made this available to you guys. If you click this, it'll come up with this page. So this is the textbook that you guys are using, Essentials of Human Anatomy, Physiology. It gives you studying tips, quizzes, practice tests, a practical lab, which I think is helpful, flashcards, glossary, key terms, PhysioX, little movies, all sorts of helpful things. What I also linked to was this interactive physiology, which has short videos, for example, on the skeletal and the muscular system, which I think might be helpful. Now, you're not required to do any of this, but this part I think is just going to help because keep in mind that your next exam is going to be in a week. So I want to look at some of these things to help you study. What you need to do this week is one, watch the video of this lecture or attend the lecture, and then post in the discussion boards 2 times. So it's two discussion posts, either about the answers to the questions I would normally have you guys talk about and work on in class, or something you found confusing. So you need to post here. There is an ungraded, not for grade, quiz about some concepts for muscles. Again, we normally would have done it in class. We don't meet as a class anymore, so it's there. The graded part is, again, the muscle worksheet. This is just graded for completion, not correctness. Here's a printout version of this muscle worksheet. I want you guys to do this on Friday. It basically asks you to give you the name of a muscle, its location. For location, you can write something like, it's on the face, it's on the arm, it's on the leg. Origin and insertion, and then the action. This worksheet comes from your textbook. So there's a chart on page like 216 to 217 of your textbook at the end of the chapter that goes through all this. These are the muscles I want you to know. And I'm going to go over this again on Wednesday. I'm just pointing out what you need to do this week is this worksheet. Okay. I also added a few other websites that I think are helpful. Okay, one of them is Bones and Muscles in 3D. So if you click on that, it brings you to the Visible Body now has a website called the Visible Body, and it's got skeletal and muscular that I think are useful. And it's free, so do that as well. Again, that is not great. So that is what I've updated here. Again, we still have the PowerPoints and all of that. If you go to assignments, you'll see we've got some upcoming things, right? The muscle worksheet, the ungraded quiz, and then you have the midterm coming up on a week from today. And I will talk about that more on Wednesday. It's going to be multiple choice and 2 short answer questions. I will discuss it more on Wednesday. Just keep in mind that that is on your horizon. Okay, so this is what we've updated for campus. This week, what you're doing, You're watching these lecture videos, participating in the discussion board, two posts in the discussion board by Friday. You're doing your muscle worksheet and you're studying. Watching lecture videos, you're commenting in discussion board, you're doing your muscle worksheet, you're studying chapters 5 and 6. Okay. So, back here. Hello. Now, throughout this lecture, whenever you need to, you can ask questions on the chat feature, but we're going to jump in to the lecture part. Keep in mind that these videos for lecture are not going to take the full 50 minutes, because in the full 50 minutes I would have done the quiz, that, the true false questions and these other types of activities that we're not going to do because we're not meeting in person. So the in-class time is going to be less, but there will be more things for you guys to do on campus, okay, which I just went over. So now I'm going to switch to the PowerPoint. Okay. And again, okay. Slideshow, play from current slide. And I have the chat feature up. So here, if you need to chat. So we're going to get started. Okay, the learning objectives for this part. We're going to define origin, insertion, prime mover, antagonist, synergist, and fixator. We're going to demonstrate different types of body movements. We're going to understand how muscles work together to make some of those movements. So these are the 5 golden rules of muscle activity. Now, where we left off, last time we had already talked about, I'm going to go back actually. Let's review what we've already talked about. So we defined the 3 different types of muscle tissue, right? Skeletal, smooth, cardiac. We then focused on the skeletal muscle. We zoomed in. We looked at the sarcomere, which is that contractile unit. We drew a sarcomere. We labeled a bunch of parts in the sarcomere. We then focused on how that skeletal muscle contracts, the skeletal muscle activity. It gets input from a motor neuron. The motor neuron is going to release acetylcholine into the synaptic cleft. It's going to bind to receptors on the sarcolemma, which is the special name that we give for the plasma membrane on skeletal muscle. It's going to open up channels. These channels are going to let sodium come in fast. Potassium is going to leave slow. This creates a wave of positive charge in the membrane that we call a depolarization. When that wave moves along the membrane, creates an action potential. This action potential opens up channels in the sarcoplasmic reticulum and allows calcium to flood out of the sarcoplasmic reticulum and into the muscle cell itself. This calcium then allows myosin to grab onto actin. Myosin will use ATP to pull actin to the midline, shrinking the sarcomere by sliding the filaments along each other. Okay, this is our muscle contraction. Contraction ends when there's not enough ATP or calcium for myosin to keep working on actin. That occurs when acetylcholinesterase breaks up that acetylcholine, turns the whole thing off. Okay, so we're now going to talk about how we get movements from this contraction. Because we zoomed in, we looked at that tiny, tiny thing, muscle cell contraction. Now, how do we zoom out and look at all the different movements and motions possible from our muscles? So, to do that, we need to keep in mind the 5 golden rules of skeletal muscle activity. 1, a few exceptions, all skeletal muscles cross at least one joint. For this, we're going to focus on our biceps, not because I have very big biceps, because it's very easy to demonstrate the bicep. So, this is our bicep. The one joint that it's going to cross here, our elbow joint. My sweater is a little worn on my elbow joint, but this is our bicep. It's going to start at our humerus, and it's going to end at our radius, and it's going to cross over and be responsible for movement of the elbow. 2. The bulk of the skeletal muscle will lie proximal to the joint it crosses. This is our arm, this is our bicep. The joint it crosses is the elbow. The majority of this muscle lies proximal, is closer to the site of attachment for our muscle. 3. Skeletal muscles have 2 attachments. The origin, where it starts, and the insertion, where it ends. So this is our bicep. The origin is going to be here on the humerus, and the insertion is on the radius. 4. Skeletal muscles can only pull, they can never push. That's because contraction only works in one direction, shortening, right? Shrinking of those fibers. It doesn't expand it out super, super far. So the muscle can only pull, which is why you have muscles in different locations that move joints, that move bones in different directions. 5. During a contraction, a skeletal muscle insertion will move towards the origin. This is our bicep. The origin is up in our humerus. The insertion is here in the radius. When it's relaxed, they're far apart. We follow this spot. When it contracts, it moves closer. Far away, closer together. Far away, closer together. Okay. Any questions on that so far? Again, if you have a question, you're going to put it in the chat feature. Awesome. Okay. So I introduced these words already, but let's define them more specifically. Origin is the less movable part where the muscle attaches, and the insertion is the part that moves. So if this is our bicep, the origin doesn't move when we move our elbow. It's the insertion that moves. The origin is held steady while we move that insertion. Okay, let's talk about types of body movements. Now, if you were in class, I would have everyone stand up and do all these motions. So I think we should still do that. So wherever you are, no one can see you, you've turned your video off. Stand up. I know, I'm asking a lot. Okay, stand up. We're going to first extend and flex our elbows. So if we're at the elbow joint, we're going to flex our elbows and extend. Flex and extend. When you flex, you decrease the angle at that joint. So if this is the angle, it's 180 degrees and we're extended, and we're going to bring it to like 30 or 45 degrees when we flex it. So we flex, and we extend, we bring it back to baseline. Flex, extend. You can also do that at your shoulder joint. When you're flexing your shoulder joint, you're moving your arm in front of you. So flex and bring it back down, extend, flex, extend, flex, extend. Exactly. Now, with your elbows, you can't really hyperextend unless you're one of those weird people that has like a double jointedness where you can bring your arm down here. I don't want to see that. That you leave in your house. But you can hyperextend at your shoulder. So flex brings your arm up, extend brings it back to your side, and hyperextend is when you move it behind you. Flex, extend, hyperextend. Okay? Any questions about that? Awesome. Okay. You can do it for your head too. So flex, bring your chin down. You're decreasing the angle at your neck. Extend. You bring it back to baseline. Hyperextend. You make it even bigger. Flex, extend, hyperextend. If we have a longitudinal axis, we can also talk about rotation. So our neck is a great example of a longitudinal axis. We can rotate our head by moving it around that longitudinal axis. Rotate, rotate, rotate. Okay? You can talk about that at your legs too. And with your legs, you can talk about medial and lateral rotations. Medial means turning your foot, turning your whole leg in, and lateral means turning your leg out. Medial towards midline, lateral away. We focus on our arms, okay, or any sort of limb, so arms or legs. We can also talk about specific movements of our limbs. So abduction, abduction, is when you move the limb away from the body, and adduction is when you bring it closer. Not to confuse with flexion and extension. For our limbs, when we're talking about flexion and extension, we're in this sagittal plane. So movement in this direction is flexion and extension in the sagittal plane. Whereas movement in this direction In this coronal plane, this is abduction and adduction. So when we move our arm away from the body, we're ab with a B, duction. And when we bring it back down, we're adduction with a D. Put up, ab, down, adduction. Circumduction is when you move your limb in a cone shape. This is circumduction. So everyone move your arms. Abduction, adduction, circumduction. Flexion at the elbow, extension at the elbow. Flexion at the shoulder, extension at the shoulder, hyperextension at the shoulder. Any questions? Awesome. Okay, let's talk about our feet. So your feet also have 4 specific movements that are special to the feet. Dorsiflexion is when you're gonna, if these are my feet, I'm not showing you my feet. Dorsiflexion, we're gonna flex our toes. Plantar flexion, pointer toes. Everyone, dorsiflex, plantar flex. P, plantar for point. Dorsiflex, plantar. Dorsiflex, plantar. You could also invert and evert your foot. So if your feet are parallel to each other, eversion is bringing your toes out. For those of you who ever took ballet or dance classes, eversion would be like going into first position. So your toes are going out. Inversion, your toes are coming in. So this is like if you learn to ski, to stop your skis, you make like a little pizza slice. That's inversion. So these are our feet. Eversion, inversion, eversion, inversion. Okay. Finally, let's talk about well, not finally, almost finally, let's talk about our arms. So this is our arms. Our arms, we have 2 bones that when we're in anatomical position, I can't really show you on this webcam. When you're in anatomical position, imagine this arm is at my side. These 2 bones are parallel to each other. The radius and the ulna are parallel. You're in anatomical position. When you rotate your arm like this, the radius crosses over the ulna. We give special names to these positions. Supination is the name we give when your arms are in anatomical position. Pronation is when they're rotated. So I like to imagine if I'm holding my arms, supination, I'm holding a little cup of soup, holding the soup. And pronation, I pour the soup out. Supination, hold the soup. Pronation, pour the soup out. And that will help you remember supination is when the bones are parallel to each other, and pronation is when they're rotated. Everyone, supinate your arms, pronate. Supinate, pronate. Okay, the final movement is opposition. This movement is what separates monkeys and humans from other mammals. So we have opposable thumbs, which means we can do this. We can touch each finger to our thumb. Note that you can't put the tips of like your pointer finger and your middle finger together. You can do that with your thumb. This is opposition. Humans and monkeys have opposable thumbs. So everyone, demonstrate your opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs. Opposable thumbs. Awesome. Okay. Any questions about movement? Going twice. Keep moving on. So, muscles. Muscles can only pull. If they can only pull, how do we have such a range of motions? How are we able to do complicated things? That's because muscles work together. When we're talking about a movement, we're going to talk about 3 different types of muscles for that movement. First, we have the prime mover. The prime mover is the major muscle responsible for that movement. If we're talking about flexion at our elbow, the bicep is the prime mover for flexion of the elbow. It is opposed by an antagonist. So for flexion of the elbow, the bicep is the prime mover. The antagonist would be our tricep. Okay? It opposes. Usually an antagonist does the opposite motion. So if one muscle is the prime mover for flexion, its antagonist would be the prime mover for extension. Does that make sense to everybody? Take that silence as a yes. Awesome. The prime mover is helped out by our 3rd type, the synergist. So the synergist is going to work with the prime mover to do that muscle movement. So for flexion at our elbow, we have the bicep opposed by the antagonistic tricep, helped out by other smaller muscles like our brachialis, for example. Synergists can sometimes help stabilize the joint or hold the origin still. They have a bunch of different roles, but they're not the major one doing that movement. Okay, let's now talk about where muscles are located and how their location helps them with the movement. Location helps with the movement. So if we're talking about flexion, muscles for flexion will cross the joint anteriorly, anteriorly meaning the front. So if we're talking about flexion at our shoulder, the pectoralis major crosses to the anterior side of that shoulder joint and is responsible for flexion. And the way you can tell what muscle is being involved is if you think it's the pectoralis major, put your hand on that muscle and then move in that way and see if you can feel the muscle contracting. For people who like to pick up heavy objects and put them back down again, this might be a little bit more intuitive. You might think like, what motions do I do to make that muscle appear more toned? For the rest of us non-heavy lifters, put your hand there, see if you can feel the contraction. So we're flexing at the shoulder, we're using the pectoralis major, which crosses to the anterior side. When we're extending at the shoulder, we're using a muscle that crosses to the posterior side, the back side. This is going to be our latissimus dorsi. So flexion, anterior crossing, extension, posterior crossing. Same is true with the elbow. If this is our body, the anterior side, flexion, the posterior side, extension. When we're talking about abduction and adduction, that's movement in this plane, the sideways plane. Things that cross on the lateral side, on the outside edge, are going to be responsible for abduction or moving it away. So our deltoid helps us abduct at the shoulder joint. Whereas things on the medial side help with adduction. So the teres major helps bring it back to the midline. It's on the medial side. Abduction, adduction. Okay. What I want you to notice this week when you're filling out your muscle chart is that muscles have names for a variety of different reasons. So they might have names for the direction of the fibers. Okay, things like the trapezius form a trapezoid shape with the fibers. They might have their name because of the relative size. We have the fibularis longus versus the brevis, right? Longer versus short. Might be named for its location. The frontalis muscle, for example, is on our frontal bone. So it might be named for where it is. It might be named for the number of origins. The bicep, bi meaning 2, has 2 origins, versus the tricep, which has 3. The reason I bring these things up is because I want you to have a way of remembering what the muscle is based on something. So that the muscle name comes from something. The meaning is there, it just might be hard to figure out. So the muscle might be named for the direction of the fibers, for its size, its location, its number and location of origin and insertion, the shape the muscle takes, the action of the muscle, or any of the above. Okay. Let's talk about fascicle shape, and this is where we're going to end today. So fascicles, if you remember, muscle cells are those fibers. They're grouped together in a group called a fascicle. And the different fascicle shapes give them different functions. So we have circular fascicles, like our orbicularis oris around our mouth, or orbicularis oculi around our eye. Circular fascicles are going to surround openings, like our mouth and our eyes. And what their job is to squeeze, to close the opening, or to relax, to open that opening. So we have circular around openings to help open and close. You also have different shapes for different amounts of power. So a convergent fascicle shape is where you have a single insertion, but a broad origin. Think of your pectoralis major. It's got a broad origin, but a single insertion. And this creates a lot of force on that insertion because all of those fascicles, all of that power is going to be acting on a single point. Things that are parallel, for example, are going to have less power and more flexibility. So things like your bicep is parallel to the long bone being your humerus. And this takes a shape called a fusiform shape, which means a spindle shape. And this is going to be not quite as powerful as some other shapes that we'll talk about, but more for flexibility. So that parallel, that fusiform shape, more flexible. Whereas the pinnate shape is going to give us more power. So a multipinnate is when you have fascicles, multiple fascicles, attaching at an angle to a central tendon. So for this, you're going to think of your deltoid. You've got multiple fascicles coming into a central tendon. And this is going to give us a lot of force because, again, each fascicle contains fibers. And when we're thinking about muscles, the number of fibers that are contracting is proportional to the force. So more fibers, more force. And with a multipinnate shape, you can squeeze in a bunch of fibers to a small space. And more fibers, more power. You can fit a lot of fascicles in a small space. You're going to have a very powerful muscle. The bipinnate, not quite as strong. This is where we're talking about 2 lines of fascicles coming into a central tendon, but it's stronger than the unipinnate, 1 line of fascicles to a central tendon. Okay, that's where we're going to leave it today. So I am going to unshare my PowerPoint here for a second, bring us back, and then open it up for any questions people have. Any questions? You could chat. Anyone have any questions? Going once, twice. Okay, so this week, again, discussion board, lectures, muscle worksheet. Discussion board, lectures, muscle worksheet. You got that ungraded quiz, and then I put up a lot of resources. Don't feel like you have to look at every website I post. This is just because I know different learning styles need different types of materials, and I'm just trying to get like a little something for everyone. So I'm going to end the recording, end class. I'll stick around in the room. If you need to talk about something, I'll be here. And then later today, as soon as it's available, I will post this recording. If you guys have any questions, thank you for bearing with me, and I will see you on Wednesday. Okay. Stopped the recording.